I know what you were thinking when you saw the thumbnail.
Did somebody say boom?
Since I covered White Mage last time, today I'm going to discuss its more mysterious counterpart, Black Mage. Along with other staples like Moogles, Chocobos, and airships, this job is easily the most iconic in the Final Fantasy franchise with its simple yet charming appearance. And just like my other history videos, I'm only covering the first 10-ish games since those are the ones I have experience with. Like I've mentioned before, Final Fantasy I is basically D&D for the NES, and the Black Mages are much more charming equivalent to the Wizard. And just like the class it's based on, the Black Mage has an incredible list of spells but doesn't even have the strength to open a new bottle of ketchup.
It's on! If I could just run this under some hot water.
Get out of here.
Thankfully, in every version after the original NES debut, intelligence actually works for boosting the power of spells. Early on, the Black Mage's offense is decent but heavily limited by their spell slots, and the job doesn't really start feeling powerful until you get level 3 spells. After this point though, Black Mage becomes the iconic glass cannon we all know it as, able to clear mobs with a single spell. Their spellbook has many classic spells we know and love like Fire, Blizzard, and Thunder, along with debuffs like Sleep. Many of the debuffs are at their best before you get access to level 3 spells because after that point it's often just easier to wipe out the mob with a simple Fire. Now while the job functions as a god of destruction against dungeon trash, they also have a few crucial buffs for boss fights. The two biggies are Temper, which raises physical damage, and Haste, which increases the number of hits dealt with a single attack. Slap these on a warrior or monk and watch them devastate bosses in only a couple of turns. While Final Fantasy II doesn't have a dedicated Black Mage, Maria will often fill this role due to her having the highest starting intelligence. If you're playing the Pixel Remaster version, this means you'll have to forsake her bow because they give massive penalties to intelligence and spirit in this game. Though realistically, most people will probably equip everyone with double shields in order to level every character's evasion and agility. Also, get ready to have Maria constantly setting her friends on fire to grind spell levels.
I can do it!
The reason to do this is the same as the old meme of having the party bludgeon each other to increase their HP. It's because the game's progression system rewards combat being drawn out to maximize interactions for stat increases. This includes attacking, casting spells, dodging, getting hit, the list goes on. Because of how grindy the progression is, being a Black Mage in particular feels really meh in this game. It becomes a very high effort task for an only okay reward during the majority of the game and requires meta knowledge of gear so you don't accidentally nerf your magic stats. At least you can use Toad as an instant kill spell in this game. Now Final Fantasy III's Black Mage is very similar to its Final Fantasy I iteration, except it has quality of life updates. The first major change is that you can achieve a Bow Mage fantasy early on to conserve spell slots. This eventually becomes less of a concern when the job gets more level 1 spell slots than you'd care for and can just use Fire for their basic attack. Having so many spell slots is super handy when you need to shrink down with mini though, since magic isn't nerfed while tiny. Meanwhile, any of the martial jobs when tiny are going to feel like Sokka during some fights in The Last Airbender.
We can take them. 3 on 3.
Actually, Toph, there's 4 of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't count you. You know, no bending and all.
I can still fight!
This allows the Black Mage to be a consistent damage dealer throughout the adventure outside of one particular dungeon where the enemies are heavily resistant to magic. Much like the White Mage, consider swapping to Geomancer after the Water Crystal because of the Black Mage's lopsided spell slot growth. Eventually it gets replaced with Magus anyway for those juicy 8th level spells. With Final Fantasy IV, we get 2 Black Mages to match the 2 White Mages who join throughout the story. Early on we get Rydia, who is primarily a summoner, so she learns black magic at a slower rate. When she rejoins the party later on, Rydia will easily be your hardest hitting party member with access to both summoning and black magic to sweep normal battles and blast bosses. Honestly, there's not much else to say about her as a Black Mage. She's a cool character and your magical beatstick. Now Palom's twin brother Palom gives us a little more material to work with. By virtue of also being a 5-year-old, he has terrible physical stats but learns black magic faster than Rydia. He can also use a bow and holy arrows to mow down the undead on mount ordeals to save MP. Palom also comes with the unique ability Bluff, which is a stacking self buff that boosts his intelligence, which makes black magic stronger. Both of the Rugrats are only in your party for a short time, but Palom is a very solid damage dealer while he's around. Now Final Fantasy V's version of Black Mage functions as the base template for future iterations of the job. It's packed with fire, ice, and lightning magic while also having quite a few solid debuffs and flair for the late game, which gives us a well-rounded damage dealer. They also skip gym class and have the second worst strength penalty in the game at -9.
Try this on for size, Hercules.
Oh we doing?
Pathetic.
Their elemental spells, however, really get to shine in this game due to the existence of rods that you can buy as early as Karnak, which boost elemental damage. All of these rods boost the damage output of their given element by 50% and have excellent synergy with Black Mage's spell list. And if need be, the Black Mage can break these rods for a free tier 3 spell for a large burst of damage that can even one-shot some bosses. Virtually every boss is vulnerable to black magic in some way in Final Fantasy V, be it an elemental weakness or one of their debuff spells like Sleep, Toad, and Break. Honestly, one of the best things about this game is that debuffs can be so impactful even in boss fights. The job does fall off a little in the late game, but that's a small concern compared to how relevant it will be across your playthrough. Final Fantasy IX gives us the incredibly iconic and lovable Vivi, a character that if you don't like him to some extent, I'm going to question your sense of empathy. Given the game's central themes, there's a very strong argument that this game is actually his story despite Zidane being the lead character, and it's hard not to feel sorry for him because the poor kid does not catch a break. Don't let the cartoony aesthetics fool you, this game won't pull its punches with dark and depressing themes. Black Mages also feature far more heavily in this game's story as they are mass-produced soldiers used in Alexandria's war campaign. This includes elite versions of the basic Black Mage model called Black Waltzes, which serve as a trio of early game bosses, the third of which is guilty of inflicting trauma on poor Vivi. Now as a party member, Vivi really shines in the mid-game when his second and third tier elemental magic will be some of your strongest damage options. And like Palom before him, he has his own version of buff called Focus to boost his magic damage. His Trance, Double Black, is also straightforward and lets him cast 2 black magic spells per turn. He's also notable for his adorable dynamic with Steiner that manifests in the sword magic mechanic that requires both characters in the party. Late into Disc 3, he'll start to fall off a bit mostly because martial damage becomes super good at that point of the game and beyond. Granted, all the party members are pretty well balanced in this game, so there are no truly godlike or trash tier characters. Be sure to pick up the Octagon Rod though in Estogaza after the Desert Palace because it's a permanently missable weapon and Vivi's only way to learn tier 3 elemental spells. Missing this weapon will gut Vivi's endgame potential since he won't be able to effectively exploit elemental weaknesses anymore. Sure, he gets Flare later on, but that will quickly drain his MP in this game. Either way, over the course of the story, Vivi will definitely carry his weight even if he gets a bit outclassed in the endgame. This brings us to Final Fantasy X's Lulu, a character easily most famous for her incredibly Nomura design with a skirt made of belts. As ridiculous as it is, I personally love the dress since it reminds me of couture fashion, and Tetsuya Nomura has regularly taken inspiration from Japanese street fashion for his designs. Now Lulu is very unusual for a black mage because her section of the sphere grid gives the most bonuses to defense, magic defense, and evasion of anyone. In spite of her low HP, she functions as a rather tanky variant of the job because of this. Lulu's primary role in this game, however, is to tag in and handle elemental enemies which have massive defense but non-existent magic defense that she can exploit. With access to all 4 elemental spells, she will easily hit weaknesses to one-shot these types of fiends. Now unfortunately, her usefulness falls off if you plan to tackle post-game content and super bosses. A couple of factors hurt Lulu here, the first of which is that most super bosses have extremely high magic defense. The second problem is with her Overdrive Fury, which is by far the weakest one in the game. Keep in mind that when I say weak, I don't mean useless, as Fury is great for securing overkills on bosses to get extra AP while leveling. Fury's biggest problem is that every spell you can choose has lower base damage than the normal spell, and the spinning mechanic scales rather slowly with Lulu's magic stat. This causes her overdrive to be a rather high effort for a low reward. The third issue that damns Lulu is acquiring her fully upgraded Celestial weapon, which means doing the infamous lightning dodging minigame. This is a bitch to do for most people because you have to dodge lightning 200 consecutive times, and failing once means you have to start over. All this makes Lulu sound like a bad character, but again, this is only in regards to post-game content. During the main story, she's a perfectly solid iteration of the Black Mage job and won't disappoint you. 10-2's Black Mage is one of the few games where the job just feels okay. Not bad by any means and totally capable of doing really good damage, but it has a hard time standing out. Much like the warrior, this job has a somewhat kooky stat progression where they start with decent magic and tremendous magic defense, and with levels their magic stat eventually catches up. It doesn't stop them from exploiting elemental weaknesses for huge damage, but it definitely feels odd coming from other Final Fantasy games. Much like its counterpart White Mage, this job can't actually attack and instead has a built-in Osmos to absorb MP and Focus to buff their spells. Early on, magic boosting garment grids like Vanguard or Bum Rush are ideal for this job, while very late in the game you can get Megiddo for access to Flare and Ultima. Accessories like the amulet are also good choices early on until you can get things like the gold hairpin. Okay, we'll finally talk about 14's iteration of Black Mage. Compared to its predecessors, this version fully commits to the heavy damage spellcaster fantasy quite well. It's also my favorite job to play since it has a learning curve that lets me feel like I always have something to improve at. Admittedly though, Endwalker has reduced this aspect of the job in the name of accessibility, but at least the job still forces you to try in order to find success. What really makes Black Mage a very successful job design is its simple rotation for casual content, while maintaining said rotation is the core challenge for more difficult content. This lets the job be accessible for multiple skill levels, and improving at Black Mage always feels tangible and satisfying because of it. I'd argue it's one of the only jobs in 14 that truly threads the needle for ideal game design without being easy to pick up but difficult to master. And while it would be nice if Black Mage had more of their classic debuff spells, I don't mind 14's iteration of the job as it is. But instead of discussing how to make a job that's already good better, I thought it'd be cool to give some tips on how to play a job for once. For reference, I have cleared multiple extreme and savage fights on this job, and it is the closest thing I have to a main in this game. Now, contrary to these memes, Black Mage actually has fantastic burst mobility for quickly repositioning itself. Yes, you don't want to move ideally, but actual fights are nothing like training dummies. For starters, your usage of Sharp Cast will heavily impact your gameplay for getting procs. Thunder procs are primarily for getting maximum damage, while Fire procs help you maintain Astral Fire during mechanics. While Thunder is technically the bigger damage gain, Fire procs still have a lot of value for their extra freedom they give you during the Fire phase. Both are instant casts too, which is extremely valuable for burst movement and extra weaving opportunities as needed. Getting a second charge of Triple Cast was an enormous mobility buff for Black Mage. When used back to back, you'll get close to the level of mobility Astrologian gets when they pop Lightspeed. Ideally, you'll want to weave Triple Cast during the Fast Fire 3 you're going to cast for transitioning into Fire phase. That way you'll get a small DPS gain on top of your mobility. Xenoglossy can be stored until you need it for movement unless you're going to overcap your Polyglot stacks. Because it's an instant cast, you can use it like Sharp Cast procs for burst mobility and a weaving opportunity. Also try to take advantage of Ice Phase Paradox's instant cast for free movement so you don't feel pressured to immediately burn your Polyglot stacks. And last but not least, we have old reliable Swift Cast. Sure, having one instant cast doesn't sound that great, but on a job that really loathes to drop its GCD, this can be a lifesaver for your parse. Another small tip is to put an emote on your hotbar to help with slide casting. The moment it lights up while you're casting a spell means you can start moving without breaking the cast. It's a small tech, but it has a massive impact on your ability to scooch out of AoEs. As you can see from this, Black Mage is a lot more mobile than any of the memes will tell you. Honestly, those jokes are so overdone that they're being served at Texas Roadhouse. Either way, based on its history of iterations, the Black Mage has always been a heavily offensive caster with a side of debuffs. And while I'm a little sad that the job can't exploit elemental weaknesses in 14, I do think it's a solid interpretation of the job's basic identity. I still recommend playing any of the other Final Fantasy games I've mentioned in this video to help diversify your experience with the job. Hopefully you enjoyed this little history lesson if this is your first time seeing my content. And if you want to see more videos like this, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Currently I plan to do videos for the 3 remaining original jobs from Final Fantasy I. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video insightful.